challenge, didn't he?
Yeah, God called his bluff on that one.
He did. Refining like silver.
This continues Yaakov's story of working in the factory, struggling with, he's gone and gotten baptized, but what is he doing in the factory? And the persecution he faced. Every factory had a political officer whose job was to make sure everybody was politically correct, I guess we would call it today, and would constantly walk around and say things like, I hear you drink blood in your church services. And Yaakov would try to answer, and then he'd say, oh, you're not allowed to be witnessing to people in this factory. You're going to be in trouble for this. That kind of entrapment.
How awful. Fighting to avoid conflict.
The second brother, Victor, he didn't have ambitions like his oldest brother. His thing was he just wanted to have fun. And so his whole thing, he just didn't want to avoid conflict. So he'd go out drinking with his friends, and then he'd go to youth meeting to please his parents. Living that kind of double life.
Double life.
I think a lot of us can relate to that.
Yep, straddling the fence. But you better get it right one day soon.
He eventually chose and landed on the right side.
On the right side. God protects and provides.
At one time, Victor and his father were to go to another town. His father, as the regional pastor, had to preach in another church, and he wanted to take Victor. But there was no gasoline available. They called everyone they knew. They didn't know what to do. And Alexei just got on his knees and said, God, provide us the gasoline. At that minute, a neighbor drove up in his little car. He said, I have enough gas to get us there, but I don't know how we'll get back. And Alexei said, let's go. They get to the church.
That's faith.
That's faith. They go to this church, and the pastor said, you know what? My son came by with a few liters of gasoline, and I thought I'd save it for you in case you actually made it. Victor told the story of how at that minute his father, who had endured so much and seen God's faithfulness so much, had tears in his eyes because his father was doubting, but then saw God's faithfulness one more time.
And God knew he needed that.
And God knew he needed that.
We're talking about the book Beyond the Rapids, one family's triumph over religious persecuted communism in the Ukraine, and it's just a very moving story. You know, we're just hitting on some highlights here, but this book is one that you'll need for your library, and it kind of shows where we are today in America and how we have got to get on our knees and pray that God will save America, that we will keep in God we trust, not in no God.
That's right.
And so we must do that. Here's one, a helicopter in Afghanistan.
The princess' daughter, Lena, married a young man named Igor, who had grown up as a non-believer and eventually became a Christian. He had to do mandatory military service and ended up in Afghanistan. The Soviet Union was embroiled in an Afghan war during the 1980s. Igor wasn't a believer, but he started to pray every day, God save my life, just preserve my life. He never was injured. In 2 years of daily helicopter patrols, the helicopter was shot up many times.
Wow.
Not a scratch. It gave him a real practical experience of God answering prayer, and that was one factor that led to him becoming a Christian.
How God uses an atheist to help me find him.
Well, Igor, after the war, went to a university and was studying and started to really question. He was questioning, how can evolution be true? How can people just believe all of this stuff? So he wanted to read the Bible. And the local library said, well, we don't have any Bibles. So he started to read atheistic books, thinking, well, maybe the atheists know something I don't. Maybe I'm just too stupid to understand this. The atheist quoted so much scripture that he learned the gospel from that, and that's how he knew that the Bible was true.
Why would the atheist quote scripture?
They were trying to disprove it. One of their favorite verses is the verse from Psalms that says, there is no God. But they took that out of context. The first part is, the fool says in his heart, there is no God.
There is no God.
Well, Igor had read there is no God many times, but when he found this one atheistic author had quoted the entire Psalm, he said, well, these guys aren't reading their own things that they're quoting. The fool says there is no God. So that was what it led to.
A scandalous romance.
Well, Lena, the daughter, in her work, started to have a relationship with a non-believer. And that caused quite a bit of scandal. Her father even threatened to excommunicate her from the church. Because at that time, you really had to either be a believer or not. There was no middle ground of, I'm going to pick and choose what I want to do.
Yeah, yeah. Here's one, testing God.
Eager was a young believer at the time he met Lena, and he used the story of Isaac and Rebekah in his search for a wife. And it's somewhat comical the way he chose to do this. Very briefly, when he actually met Lena for the first time, he proposed to her. And Lena her parents told her, you need to make the choice. We're not going to choose for you. She was very confused by this man that appeared out of nowhere and wanted to marry her, who was so convinced it was God's will. And she gives us a great case study in looking for God in all the wrong ways. She was testing God. God, if this happens, then I'll know I should not marry Eager, or if this happens, I'll know. She was so consumed with her fear, she couldn't see what God was telling her.
In this last minute, tell me some of the other whatever in this book that we should look forward to.
The youngest son ended up in the criminal world for a while. And it's a wonderful story of how he finally came back to Christ, and his mother's comment, they wondered why for 22 years they were praying for him. And when they finally saw it, they saw that it was God's wonderful plan and in God's wonderful timing. So we should never give up praying for our loved ones.
What communists, it fell.
It fell in 1991.
And so they're free to worship God.
Right.
The way they want.
Mm-hmm.
And America, I'm speaking to you. Let's keep our freedom. You need to read this book. It's a great book, a great read. Beyond the Rapids. Go to your phone, make that call, get this book. It's very important for you. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Author Evelyn Puerto brings you the true story of a family that endured hostile persecution for their faith in God. Beyond the Rapids takes you on a journey with the Brenza family as they live through the horrors of a communist Ukraine, living through the times of Christianity being a crime. Read how Alexia and Valentina Brenza lead the family through temptations, threats, and the constant realization that their faith in Jesus could lead to death. Beyond the Rapids is a story for all believers everywhere who are concerned for the disappearance of religious freedoms, children who have wandered from God, and those who are in need of hope. Be encouraged and uplifted through this dynamic true story. Beyond the Rapids is available today for this special offer of $19.99. Simply call 888-725-8033 or log on to our website, buythebook.tv. Request offer number 241. Buy the book today. By the Book's Dorothy Spaulding opens her heart in her book, We Walk by Faith, Not by Sight, a story that will connect with every reader. As Dorothy shares her real adventure in faith, walking the cross thousands of miles throughout the United States, for 8 years witnessing and challenging people to be bold witnesses for Jesus. Order your copy by calling 888-725-8033 for just $14.95 plus shipping and handling. Ask for offer number 140.